Mother's Day, everybody.
Happy Mother's Day.
To all you gentlemen sitting out there, happy Mother's Day to you too. It's only fair, right?
Right.
But where would we be without our moms? Correct? Where would we be? And nowhere. That's good. Well, each of you should have received a bulletin when you came in this morning. And in your bulletin is a half sheet that doesn't have anything on it except the words sermon notes. And so I would like it right now, I'm going to give you a minute or two, to pull out that piece of paper and write down three words, not sentences, but 3 words that you believe best characterize and describe mom. So let me give you an example. If we're talking baseball and I asked you to describe baseball in 3 words, you probably would write down hit, throw, and field. So, what are 3 words that best describe mom? Now I'll give you a minute or 2 to think of that. No. Some of you come up with 3 words? Yeah. Good. Now I want you to hold on to those 3 words because you're going to see how well they match up with the passage from Ruth today. Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 through 17. As we discuss moms and as we discuss characteristics and traits of moms that are important in this day and age, as it was when the book of Ruth was written. Now, just a little bit of background, because we're starting with verse 6, but in verses 1 through 5, we find out that the judges are governing. There are a whole bunch of judges. Deborah's a judge, and Samson's the judge, and at various times. So it's during this period of time, there came a famine, in the land. A certain man from Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab, and he went with his wife, and he went with his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. And the names of their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. And they entered the land of Moab, and they remained there. But Naomi's husband died in verse 3, and she was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. And one of them was named Orpah, which is Oprah Winfrey's real first name, by the way. They transposed it and it went from Orpah Winfrey to Oprah Winfrey. That's where the name comes from. And the other name was Ruth. And they lived in this land of Moab about 10 years, and then both the husbands died, and the women were bereft of children and their husbands, and so it's just the 3 of them abiding together. And so in verses 6 through 8, the very first trait that we're going to see is a trait of selflessness. She, being Naomi, arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So she departed from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. So here we got, news travels. We find out that there's a famine. We find out that there's relief if we journey to Judah. And so here we go. We're going to go on this journey to Judah. And Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me." So the very first trait we see coming out of Naomi, out of a mom's heart, is I'm thinking of you before I think of me. I'm going to make sure that your needs are taken care of. I'm going to make sure that you have the opportunity to have a great life. I'm going to make sure that you go back to where your family was. Don't worry about me. I will be fine. So she encourages both Ruth and Orpah go home. And it sure appears from verses 6 through 8 that the women were planning to stay with Naomi for as long as it originally would take. Now it's interesting that Naomi is demonstrating this because we read in Proverbs chapter 31 verse 15, while she gets up while it's still dark, she provides food for her family and portions for her servant girls. And in Romans 12:3, do not think more highly of yourself than you ought to think. Naomi here is practicing the first trait of selflessness. And I think every mom learns that trait really quick because they have a heart that they want to do. So if I have to give up something, I'm going to do something for you. And Naomi demonstrates that here, the whole art of being selfless and thinking of other people. It shows itself in putting others ahead of yourself. It shows itself by seeing needs met, no matter how big or how small they are, by giving sound, biblical, godly advice, by doing something which makes others happy, and by sharing yourself with other people. And so selflessness is part and parcel of who Naomi is. And so she gives of herself in this way to Ruth and to Orpah because she knows it will better them rather than have them stay with her and cling to her. The second trait that we find with moms is that moms model loveliness. In verses 9 through 13, she says, may the Lord grant that you may find rest each in the house of her husband. And she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices, and they cried. Here we see that Naomi has managed to include them in her family. We all hear stories about mothers-in-law, right?
Yeah.
Some of them are not so good, right? I mean, there are some mothers-in-law who manage to do things that don't blend them well into certain situations. But here in verse 9, we find out that these women, Ruth and Orpah, who married into this family, who, they've gone through all kinds of things together, that, they are getting together and they're weeping when Naomi tells them, you should go home. You should, go that way and be there. And so they're overcome with emotion, which tells me that Naomi treated them the way in which she would like to be treated. And so there's a degree of loveliness here. And they said to her, no, but we will surely return with you to your people. And Naomi said in verse 11, return, my daughters, why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight, and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. In other words, hey, I just think it's wonderful you want to hang with me. I think it's wonderful that you want to be part of me. I think it's great that you want to still stay family with me. But girls, face facts here. Even if I got married today, and even if I had 2 sons tomorrow, how many years will it be before they would be old enough to marry and do all these things? It isn't possible. So I really, really, really want you to go. So don't stay with me out of sympathy. Don't stay with me for any other reason. Just go. You need to go. Well, Naomi here is modeling what we see in 1 Corinthians 13. Because in 1 Corinthians 13, we see a great definition of what love is. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, love does not brag, it's not arrogant, it does not act unbecomingly, it does not seek its own, it's not provoked, it does not take into account a wrong suffered, it does not rejoice in unrighteousness, it rejoices with the truth, it bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things, and it never fails. Naomi here is demonstrating, an incredible belief that God is going to take care of everything, that God is going to oversee everything, that I don't need to be selfish, that I don't need to think only of myself. I need to think of you, and I need to love you like I know God loves me. I need to love you like God loves me. So she's demonstrating the qualities that the Apostle Paul wrote about in 1 Corinthians 13. And then we see the response here is a logical response. You know, I'm not going to cling to you because I need you. I'm not going to cling to you because you're going to support me. I'm not going to cling to you because you don't have any other options. You do have options. And I have a God who I can believe in. And I have a God who's going to sustain me. And I have a God who's going to keep me and who's going to provide for me. You guys need to go. It's a wonderful, wonderful quality when your mom can demonstrate that gift of loveliness. You know, it reminds me of Proverbs chapter 31, verses 19 through 20. Generosity is the key in love. And Leviticus 19:18, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Why? Because you understand that this is what God does. And moms mirror what God does. And it's shown, loveliness is shown by being there, by being available, and keeping lines of communication open, and all the rest that's encompassed in that. The third quality is that of godliness in verses 14 through 17. They lifted up their voices, and they wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So Orpah, okay, I get the message, I'm going to go home. So Orpah went back, probably to Moab, probably to her family, probably eventually got married, had kids, and all these things. Influenced greatly by what Naomi did. And so she leaves. But Ruth clings to her, clings to Naomi, and she says, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. So Naomi still says, hey, Ruth, you need to go back. You need still to go back. You know, and Ruth says, in the famous verses out of the book of Ruth, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. In my second church, which was Crystal Springs Bible Church in San Mateo, I had a man in the church, his name was Fred, and Fred was married to Augusta. And it was real interesting because they were from the South. And if you ever travel in the southern part of the United States, they use this phrase all the time, my people are coming. You know? So when Augusta's four sisters would fly in, Fred would say, Augusta's people are coming. And I would, you know, I wasn't raised in the South, and so hearing people from the southern United States, you know, utter that, I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And then when Fred's people would come, he would say, my people are on the way. You know, they're going to be, and he just loved it. They're staying with us for a month. Okay. And he would take them to Muir Woods, and he would take them to San Francisco, and he would take them to Napa, and he would take them to Carmel. And when the month was over, Fred said, wow, we just had the greatest time with my people. This was just great. He goes, they got in the kitchen and they cooked, and he goes, we had a great time laughing, telling stories. You know, those are my people. You know? And I thought, well, good for you, Fred. This is really cool. You know, I never heard it quite put that way before. But we see here that Ruth is telling Naomi, you know what? Your people are going to be my people. And notice more importantly, your God at the end of verse 16, your God is going to be my God. Now remember, Ruth comes out of Moab. And Moab has got all these other gods, as Naomi has alluded to in verse 15. And so now, all of a sudden, Ruth has been able to see Naomi's life up close. And in the process of seeing Naomi's life up close, she's come to the realization that, wow, you serve a mighty God. You serve one who supplies your needs. You're not frustrated. You're not jealous. You're not this. You're not that. You're at peace because you know God has got everything under control. When I married Janice a long time ago, about 500 years ago now, you know, Janice's grandmother was still living, and she died 40 years ago, 40. And I remember thinking as I looked at her, you know, her heart was not working as well as it once did. And she was relegated, you know how it is when people get old, you know, no, we don't want you doing that. We don't want you climbing those stairs. Don't lift that box. Don't do anything. And poor Grandma Caines, would sit in the rocking chair, and I tell you, I would watch her as everybody said, we need to add flour to this, we need to do this, we need to do that. She would just sit in that, remember that rocking chair, And she would sit in it, and she would rock back and forth, and I'll never forget the day when the women didn't know how to do something. And so Grandma Caines, do you remember this, Janice? Leaped up out of her rocking chair, and she was right there in the midst of all this stuff, and she was just having the greatest time, And I thought, wow, you know what? I want to be like her when I grow up. I thought, I want to have that kind of spirit that is willing to trust God. And even though they're making a mistake in the kitchen, I'm not going to go in there until I'm called on. I thought, holy cow, this is what it looks like to walk with the Lord after 50 years, because she had accepted Christ in the early 30s. And I looked at her and I thought, the serenity that was there, the trust in God that was there. And she was going through trials when, over 40 years ago. Her husband had Alzheimer's back when most people didn't know what that was. She had to make the decision to put him in a home after almost 60 years of marriage. It killed her. And yet through it all, she knew that God could be trusted. What a testimony. What an absolute testimony. And I think back on her many times, because I think, wow, here was a woman who, even in the throes of dying, when Janice said to her, Grandma, we don't want you to go, we don't want you to go, and she said, honey, I just want to go and be with Jesus. Wow, that's pretty cool. You don't get that in families every day. And so look at the impact that that woman had, and here we're talking about her 40 years later, but look at the impact that Naomi had with Ruth. Just lived her life, lived what she knew to be right and correct. And that spoke volumes, even though there's no verbal words here to express that. So, where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, in verse 17, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. And I think to myself, wow, what an opportunity we have, each of us have, and our moms have, because they can practice godliness. They can practice godliness. What do you do if you had a godly mom? What do you do if you had a godly mom? Number one, you thank God for her. You may think, Mom says she's praying for me. You be thankful Mom is praying for you. You thank Mom for your God for your heritage. You can pass it along to your kids. You can model it. You can model what you've seen your whole life. But what if you didn't have a godly mom? And there are a lot of moms out there who aren't godly. I was talking to a mom yesterday, and she told me, she said, I'm just on the verge of losing it. I said, what's the matter? She goes, oh my gosh. She goes, my 13-year-old. My 13-year-old is destroying things at home. He's hitting me. He's throwing things at me. He's telling me he wants me to die. And she goes, I really don't want to talk about it. But she ended up talking about it with me for quite a while. And I sat there and I said, you know what? Your child, even though he's 13, is looking for you, from you. And she goes, what? I go, consistency. I said, still love him. Still pray for him. Still do the things that you know to do. Not everybody has a godly mom. And so begin today to break that cycle. As a kid growing up, my dad never said, I love you to me. And that wasn't because he didn't love me. It was because my grandfather never used that terminology. So my dad, who left home at 14, never learned how to say that. And I thought, you know what? We got to do something that's going to be able to break that chain. Otherwise, it's just going to keep being perpetuated. And so one day at a Giants game, Ben and I were sitting in the upper deck at Candlestick Park, and I said to him, your grandfather never told me, but a couple of times in my whole life that he verbally told me, I love you, Jack. Just didn't do it. And I said, I learned as I grew up that your grandfather would give me things. So when I became someone who played tennis on the tennis courts, guess who showed up with a racket? Here, son, here's a racket. Oh, that's great, And I said to Ben that day, I said, you know, I want you to learn how to say I love you at a moment's notice. I said, you know, just when you feel like saying I love you, just say it. And so I said, I love you, Dan. He goes, thanks, Dad. And so the game went on, you know, and we're sitting there in the 7th inning. He turns and looks at me. I'll never forget it. 7th inning, he says, Dad, I love you. You know? And to this day, if I don't tell him I love him in a phone call, he's going to be 36 on Tuesday. If I don't tell him that, you know, I love him, he'll say, Dad, how come you're not telling me you love me? And I think, good, the chain has been broken. And I, lest you think I hold anything against my dad wasn't trained. So I don't hold anything against my dad, okay? But I thought somewhere along the line, we've got to do the things that are necessary. So we can sit back and say, Mom was this, Mom was that, and we can wallow in self-pity and all these other things. But we really got to learn that the chain is broken at this point. And so we've got to model selflessness. Even though we may have had the most selfish mom in the world, we got to model selflessness. Second of all, we got to model love. We got to model love to our kids. Maybe it's tough love sometimes. Maybe it's not. But we got to learn how to model loveliness to them. And we have to model godliness. Where else are they going to learn it? Where else are they going to learn it? I mean, and it's not like, son, you need to trust God. This is the thing to do, you know? You got to live it. Sometimes the verbal part is not necessary. My son called my wife the other day, and he goes, I almost called Dad, which would have been nice. I would have liked to have heard from him. He goes, almost called Dad, but I didn't want a sermon. And so, you know, I thought, you're always learning as a parent. You're always learning and stuff. But these are the things that you do if you didn't have a godly mom. You've got to break the cycle. So now I want you to look back at the sheet that I asked you to write 3 words on. Did we connect on any of them? You know? And so the essential characteristic here is a mom who trusts the Lord with all her heart and does not lean on her own understanding. You know, a mom who determines that in all her ways she shall acknowledge God, and only God can make a path straight. And she passes that on. And if you've got a mom who did that, you rise up and you call her blessed. You rise up and call her blessed. You know, if the Beatitudes could be rewritten for today, I think they go something like this. Blessed is the mother who understands her child, for she shall inherit a kingdom of memories. Blessed is the mother who knows how to comfort, for she shall possess a child's devotion. Blessed is the mother who guides by the paths of righteousness, for she shall be proud of her children. Blessed is the mother who is never shocked, for she shall receive and know confidence and security. Blessed is the mother who teaches respect, for she shall be respected. Blessed is the mother who emphasizes the good and minimizes the bad, for her children shall follow her example. Blessed is the mother who answers questions honestly, for she shall always be trusted. And finally, blessed is the mother who treats her children as she would like to be treated, for her home shall always be filled with happiness. Let's pray. Lord, thanks for the opportunity looking at the life of Naomi. Thank you, God, that we're all like her, and that you can influence our lives, so in turn our lives can influence others. And God, we do thank you. We thank you with a lot of enthusiasm for our moms, for all that they sought to teach us, for the ways in which they sacrificed for us. We're thankful, Lord, for those that had godly moms, that led and by example. And we thank you for the godly moms who are here today, that you would continue to bolster them, encourage them, and help them to be a beacon to their family. And we pray this all, and everybody said, Amen. Amen.